Thank you for attending this press conference. I am Rene Hill. I was the chairperson for Community Board 12, and I am a preservationist. I help landmark Adelaide Park, so it's so important to me to keep our history, our African American history, our community history of our community. And we're here today because this church, St. Joseph Episcopal Church in Queens Village, is the Diocese of Long Island is thinking about demolishing it and putting up some unknown structure in place of the church. And we really need to protect this jewel, this hidden jewel, because it's right in the heart of Queens Village. For our history and for our community and for our single and two-family homes, the whole character of the community would change if this church was demolished. They do have a school in the back which could be used if they needed income, so there's no reason to demolish this church. So the Episcopal Diocese is trying to close down St. Joseph's using inconsistent arguments, saying that the DOB, or the Department of Buildings violations, are making it cheaper to demolish making it cheaper to build rather than demolish, and to build a new financially viable building. This is inconsistent. Violations have been cleared up and outstanding penalties amount to $1,000. Similar Episcopal churches that have had major fires or other disasters in recent years have been carefully renovated and restored. For at least the last 10 years, the diocese has been shuttering or tried to shut historically African American churches and parishes. See St. Stephen's and St. Martin's Episcopal in Bedford-Stuyvesant was an example. They had tried to demolish that at one time, and they fought it. Also, there's Old St. John's Church in Elmhurst, and there's Matthias Church in Wantagh that also fought the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Long Island, and they won. They fought for a lot of long years, but they saved their church. It's so important that we, as a community, and we have community leaders here today, work to save this church. Whatever the church needs, we are willing to support it in any way. There's no way to have the Long Island Diocese destroy our church. The one in Wantagh was the second oldest African American congregation in Long Island. Ours is very old as well. The marking is what, 1894 on the building when it was built, the first part of the church. Also, the same Long Island Diocese tried to demolish the St. Stephen's Church in Jamaica, which we all know has been there forever. It's right in back of the former Mays parking lot, back of where the police department is, and right in back of the library. And thanks to their vestry, they did their research, and they made sure that they were able to save their church. And this just happened last week. So I'm happy for them, and that they understood that that church is historic, just like this church is. It's a sister church. This is a sister church to St. Stephen's Church in Jamaica, and also it's related to Grace Episcopal Church on Jamaica Avenue. So it's so important that we keep our history. And I know the community, I spoke to many neighbors here, they all want this church to stay. There's no reason for it to be demolished, especially since there's no violations and fines as alleged by the diocese. The complex, which remains, is relatively in good repair and has historic details. It was designed by some of the premier architects of the 19th century and early 20th century. It's the Parfit brothers. And they're considered the top architectural firm from Brooklyn in the late 19th century, and they designed this church. It is the only confirmed commission in Queens County that they designed, and it must be preserved. Tuthill and Huggins designed the original Jamaica Hospital, Richmond Hill branch of the Queens Public Library, Carnegie Library, and in addition to the Reformed Church of Jamaica, were an extremely well-known firm from Jamaica. That's Tuthill and Higgins. They had part in designing this. Also, Hobart and Upjohn. the grandson of Richard of John, who designed Trinity Church, one of the most well-known architects of religious buildings, particularly the Episcopal Church. Church leaders made history here, becoming the leaders of the Episcopal Church in the diocese. The 150-year history of this church, including its members, parishioners, and leaders, has been exceptional and should be celebrated by saving this complex. I'm just so personally upset about it because I just love the history that we have in our Southeast Queens community, and I know that after saving Adelaide Park and saving the VA hospital, how it was so much appreciated by our community that we were able to keep the green space. Not only is this a beautiful structure that we need to save, but the green space around it is absolutely gorgeous, and it brings peace and calmness to our children and to our community. So if we put a large brick structure here, which they might plan on doing, this would be to the detriment of our beautiful suburban-like community. So as I'm running for City Council, District 27, because this is my passion. I have been trying to keep our communities without this overbuilding. With the history that we have, we need to save it. We can't keep on ignoring historic buildings and letting them be demolished, and then we feel sorry after. I know that there's we welcome a lot of people into our community, newcomers all the time. Our texture of our community has changed, but we cannot let go of our history, and we have to let everyone appreciate it. We have to make our history known, and I have some people I would like to introduce. I have Bishop Artis here. He'd just like to say a few words. I did meet with some reverends yesterday and some rabbis, and they feel the same as us. They are willing to help save this church. So, Reverend Artis.
I'd just like to say that I'm Bishop Artis. I represent 4 churches in Queens, Southeast area, but I have seen the way that is being done, and I'm appealing to all pastors that's in the Queens area, because I have seen it happen in Brooklyn when they started with one church and was able to do what they want to do. They went on down the line, whatever church they picked, and they built on those churches. So I'm saying to the clergy of the Southeast Queens area that we got to get behind this diocese and make sure not only this church, but any other church they have in mind of demolishing and destroy and killing the history. We have to get behind this diocese, these peoples that's in this diocese, and make sure that this church remain. Because if they're gonna do it to this one and we let them get away, we don't know who's gonna be the next that they're gonna target in order to get rid of your church. So I'm appealing to every clergy in the Southeast Queens area. Let's get behind the peoples of this church and make sure that this history remains intact. That's all I would like to say.
Thank you, Bishop Artis. I'd like to bring up Paul Graziano. He's a historian and preservationist in Queens. Thank you.
Thanks, Rene. So just a little bit of clarification. What seems to be happening over the last decade is that the Diocese of Long Island, which represents Brooklyn, Queens, Nassau, and Suffolk, has been going on a specific mission or agenda targeting historically African American churches or African American churches. The churches that were brought up, which include Stephen and St. Martin Episcopal Church in Bedford-Stuyvesant, that church was actually demolished. That church was not saved. And the replacement to that church, 90% of the lot is now covered with housing, not with a church. And the church building that's there is a cinder block, 2-story building. They did not even save the stained glass windows. The church in Wanta, St. Matthias Church, was in a 10-year legal battle with the diocese. And the diocese finally won the right to take over that church. And luckily, the town of Hempstead stepped in and landmarked the building. It was about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And that's what saved that church. There was already a for sale sign on the front lawn, and that's when the town took action to protect it. It was the second oldest congregation of African American congregation in all of Nassau County. It was founded in the 1850s after Zion AME on Community Drive across from North Shore Hospital. St. James Church in Elmhurst, I was actually tangentially involved in that one. That was about, I want to say 6 or 7 years ago. But St. James, which is one of the oldest structures, Old St. James Church, which had been renovated in the 1880s and had actually received an enormous grant from the Landmarks Conservancy to restore their building, which, by the way, that could happen for this property as well, because they have a thing called sacred sites, which can give grants of money to historic churches. They had restored the church, and when there was a move to try to landmark it, they were initially opposed, and I actually went to the site and took pictures. This is when the Queen's Library across the street was being rebuilt. They were just renting out the interior of the building, and it was a construction disaster. They had basically ruined the inside of the building. They were just using it as a slop house for construction. So to me, that was incredibly disrespectful. That building is from, I believe, 1720 or something like that. It's over 300 years old, and they were treating that building like a garbage bin. So it seems to be, and again, this is all in the last decade, it seems to be that there is a very specific agenda by the Episcopal Diocese to be focusing on these buildings. Would you see this happen in Garden City at the seat of power of the Episcopal Diocese? No. Do you see this happening in wealthy congregations in white neighborhoods? Definitely not. So there is definitely something through the prism of ethnicity and race, which is very disturbing to me, because looking at how the Episcopal Church has described themselves, that doesn't really match. There was some argument recently, I heard something about, I believe the bishop stated that one of the demolitions that they were going to do was for reparations. So you're demolishing a church for reparations? No, the reparations are to restore the church, help the congregation, not destroy it for its real estate potential. So I just want to say that. The last thing I do want to say is, I want to talk about the architecture here. The architecture here is incredibly significant. The Parfit brothers, their work is seen all over Brooklyn. You ever been to Park Slope? You ever been to Brooklyn Heights? You ever been to Crown Heights North or other areas in Brooklyn? The Parfit brothers, their buildings are all landmarked throughout these areas. Their mansions and their churches and their other apartment buildings that they built. As far as we know, this is the only commissioned piece by the Parfit brothers in Queens. And it was done before Queens was even part of New York City in 1894. So that's very important. Tuthill and Higgins, they were a very important firm from Jamaica. They were extremely active in the late 19th into the mid 20th centuries. They designed the first Jamaica hospital. They designed the rectory building to be complementary in a stylistically similar design to this building. The third important architect is Hobart Upjohn, who was the grandson of Richard Upjohn. Richard Upjohn was the designer, the architect of Trinity Church. And he had a long history of designing religious buildings, mostly in North Carolina and in upstate New York, but he did do work here, including the Memorial Hall for Grace Episcopal Church in 1912, and the parish hall for this church. So this right there, in any other place in the United States, someone would look at this and say, wow, this is a powerhouse of art. I've never seen architects of this caliber all working on the same complex over a 30-year period. It's really impressive. And even the architects who then altered the building. In 1935, they expanded this building slightly, and they changed the entryway here and made it more symmetrical. That architect was significant. The architect who worked on the rectory was significant. The architect who worked on the connector, what's called the Webster Cloister, was significant. He designed the Bulova School of Watchmaking in Woodside and was an early proponent for handicapped accessible buildings And in fact, that building is known for being one of the first buildings in the United States with a wheelchair ramp. This building was the connector for these two buildings, and I'm sure there was something of that in consideration because it made it easier to travel between these two buildings. So, as I said, this is important historically. This place is important. It is. There's a statement, place matters. Look at this area. Look at how this was set up. This is the town square of this part of Queens Village. Place matters. History matters. The history of this place, the actual history of St. Joseph's is impressive if you start looking at the actual history. The architecture is significant and matters. And for the Episcopal Diocese to do this with what can only be described as a misguided effort to clear this property to make it ready for new development, which we don't even know what that new development might be, is very, very disturbing. With no notification to the community board. In fact, I'm the person who notified Community Board 13 about this a few weeks ago, and it's all very, very concerning. The last thing I will say is, let's talk about the zoning. This is in an R3-2 zone. R3-2 is the lowest density residential multifamily zone. Queens Village, when all of these areas of Southeast Queens were being rezoned, particularly in Board 13 and a large portion of Board 12, Queens Village was the only neighborhood that did not get rezoned. The only one. Half of Queens Village is north of Jamaica Avenue, half of it is south of Jamaica Avenue. None of it got rezoned, except for a few blocks near the Belrose border. So this is a big issue because if this had been rezoned, the temptation to convert this into a real estate holding would probably have been removed, because this would have been rezoned to a 1 and 2 family detached neighborhood without a question, looking at the housing that's all detached single and 2 family houses around it. So that being said, the property is not particularly large, and it's also a very odd shape. So to build something large here, they're not going to be able to do this in this zone. And I would say, and I'm counting on Rene to do this, if she gets elected and they try to come for a zoning to rezone this property, she will not only say no then, but she should be saying no now.
Right.
Don't even think about it.
Right.
Come and talk to you to have a conversation
board,
now. And
right,
the community board.
It has to be, the community has to be involved.
Correct. So that's where I'm going to leave it.
Yeah, I would
turn
like
it back to Rene.
Richard just to say a few words, if he doesn't mind. Richard Hellenbrecht, he represents community board. He was community board 13 chair at one time, and now I think you're land use, right?
Well, yes.
Okay.
My name is Rich Hellenbrecht. I'm first vice chair of Community Board 13, and I just stepped down from being chair of land use for Community Board 13 for many, many years, but I'm still very much involved in it. I really can't speak much about the zoning at this point in time because this will come before the Community Board, and I've not been authorized to speak for the Community Board, but I can speak for myself. Walking around this lot and this property and looking at the neighborhood and looking at the building, this is really a prize, and this is something that has to be preserved in whatever way that we can possibly do to do it. It's just gorgeous. It's a lovely building. The architectural history, I'm really here to learn about the property, and I've learned a lot from Mr. Graziano and Ms. Hill. There's a tremendous history in this area. It's a wonderful area. As you can tell, it's very quiet, very peaceful, and we just need to protect this building, keep it going, get the congregation back in here once the COVID issues are over with, and I think this place can be fixed up very nicely. We can even bring local contractors in to get to work on this, and I think it's a tremendous project to go forward. So it will be coming before the community board, and I can't speak on that at this point in time. But I think the community needs to be very strong on this.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you
Oh,
for
no, thank
what
you.
you've done.
Thank you. I just want everyone to see it's been neglected. It's the clapboard, but it just needs to be painted. This kind of architectural kind of wood exterior lasts for years, hundreds of years. We have so that if they make it look like it needs a lot more, but paint job would really clean this place up and it looks beautiful. And that's a minor expense.
Like they did to the rectory, which
Yes.
they did clean up.
Yes, like they did to rectory. So I want to thank everyone. Oh, Maureen, would you like to say? Okay, I have a former member of the church here that would like to say something. This is Maureen.
Good afternoon.
You can take your mask off.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon. I just want to say thank you for the people who have come.
Speak up, Maureen.
I just want to say thank you for the people who have come, and God is with us because this is out of prayer. I have stepped away from my church, which is not the first time, but I've stepped away fully because I think that people in our church want to save this church. It may not be everyone, but we want to save it. But because of COVID and because of the complications of not knowing when to speak, how to speak, and the manner in which to speak or to whom to speak, I think that our congregation has put in a situation that we don't speak because we're afraid to speak. I hope that if you are seeing this on the video, I hope that if you're reading this in the paper, that those of you who respect me, as I know some of you don't, but those of you who respect me, know that I'm doing this for your best efforts. It's not for me. It's not for me. I'm trying to help you to understand that we have this property in our name from 1955. And I don't know what role Ms. Webster may have played in that, but we own this property. And as owning this property, we have to take care of it. And if there are people in charge not taking care of it, we have the right, and actually we have the duty as Christians to say you're not doing a job, we need to move on. And we should not be afraid. Look at what we have done to what our ancestors have given us, no matter what race. Look what we've done. This is a tremendously wonderful present. And had we just taken care of it, we can always renovate it inside. We can always do things inside to make it accommodating. But that takes planning. That takes people. So I hope you realize, those of you who are wanting this church to stay, because I know that there are people who want it to stay, that we have people on the outside to help us. There is a rule on the vestry that you're not supposed to make a job without 3 estimates. So far, we've only gotten 1 estimate, and that's from the diocese. And we don't even know if the diocese controls us or if we're an independent church. The lack of transparency is the problem in this church, and this is why we've now come to people telling us we're tearing down a church that some of us really, really love. Some of us got married here, baptized here, got confirmed, had plays here. This used to be the center of art for the Queen's Art Society. This used to be a Republican church. We had Judge Grote here. Judge Grote, this was a mostly Republican church, and we were active in the civic community. The American Legion, the VFW. We did memorial parades. We were active. And one of the reasons why, and this is just a new realization, we have been separated is because of development. Look at that cross. It faces the wrong way. Wow. It faces the wrong way because there was no building over there. You could see it on Hempstead Turnpike and come into St. Joseph's. The railroad was not elevated. You could see St. Joseph's from Jamaica. So when people say they can't find us, it's not because St. Joseph's did it. It's because of poor planning. And what's happening here is poor planning, but not talking to us as if we are adults. And it's also poor planning in that some of us are afraid. Don't be afraid. We have company now.
Yes.
We have company.
Yeah,
Do not be afraid. And if you think I'm going against the bishop, God will deal with me. But God has been telling me to do this. We have rights in this church as Episcopalian. We are not Church of England. We revolted from England back in 1776. As people of this church, we have the right to talk and have questions answered,
Yes.
and get our reports given to us when we ask for them.
Yes.
And that if they don't do it, there are repercussions, and this is one of them. And this is how I grew up. When people didn't get their reports back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, this is what happened. And you need to realize I'm not doing something I didn't see before. This is extreme. But you have to understand, if you want this church, if you want the school to come back, if you want us to have a community garden, if you want us to develop and have something for this community and give out of our good heart, which I know so many of us have good hearts, you have to speak up. And you have to demand what you want.
The church is also supposed to serve the community, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So we were serving the community with the school, and we wanted to feed the homeless, but the building limited us from feeding the homeless. But that can be changed. It just requires strategic planning. Nothing is impossible with God. We walk by faith, not by sight.
Can be done.
And yet you can be done.
Right.
Now, for those of you who don't know, this entire area, right up to where those automobiles are, was Callister Farm. Everything over here. The Callisters were the entrepreneurs in Queens Village. There are historic people here, and they were the first people on the vestry at St. Joseph's. They planned how this would go. They planned how the Jamaica Avenue would look. The community theater was what the Callisters did. There is a kneeler in there with Thomas Callister on there. And what you should know, that Thomas and Ruth Callister gave us a good deal for this land. They were childless. They didn't have any children. This church is their child. Joseph took care of a child. He was a dreamer, and he married Mary. Just like Gomer, people were talking about her. How did she get expected? How did she get pregnant? Joseph listened to God. He listened to the dreams. Everyone said he was crazy. He helped Mary. He married Mary and took care of Christ. This is our mission. Not the building, but the people to communicate with each other and to let us know what is happening in this church, that we in the Episcopal Church, according to the Protestant Episcopal Church, we the people have a voice. We are the voice. We give the authority to the vestry to do what we want. So let us take care of Christ. Let's take care of the mission. Because this is a building, but it's a place where we meet so we can do our mission. And if we don't have a building and we don't have a place, there is no mission, except individually. And you cannot do much individually. Because where there's unity, there's strength.
Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cynthia, would you like to? Okay.